Hi, good morning, and welcome to this seminar for We Are Worthy Summit. I'm Yvonne John, and my webinar this morning is about owning your story. And there are a number of stages that I experienced with regards to owning my story. So I thought I'd just take you through a bit of a journey to how I got here. And looking back at the start of my journey, I remember with Gateway Women that I wasn't able to speak about what I considered my shameful past. And this really impacted on my ability to grieve and also my ability to talk about my situation. In her book, Living the Life Unexpected, Jodie Day mentioned that there is no acceptable way to talk about childlessness. It is a taboo. And like all taboos, the way it's policed is that talking about it seems shameful and embarrassing. No one wants to risk raising a subject with us in case they embarrass us or embarrass themselves. Childless women often stay silent too. And I felt this a lot when I was going through the Gateway Women's year-long Plan B mentorship program, and I realised how much we as childless women are silenced, we're not heard, we're not listened to. And that's if anyone dared to ask us if we had children. For me, this all started in October 2014 when I heard the two words unexplained infertility. Now, that was the diagnosis my consultant gave me after I had been trying for 3 years naturally and had a year of fertility investigation. And those two words just sent me into this crazy world of grief, which I didn't understand. There was a lot of feelings around it. And because no one could tell me why I couldn't conceive, I just blamed myself. And all the stuff from my past just came flooding back. And it was shocking because I thought these were things that I had buried, forgotten about, dealt with. But, you know, I had a really unsuccessful dating history. It wasn't the greatest. And there were two times in my 20s, my late 20s, where I found myself pregnant and I terminated the pregnancies. And that was the shame that I hid from the world. I hid it from everyone. And I remember going around thinking, what would people think of me if they knew about this? And as soon as I heard the two words unexplained infertility, and as soon as I was in this place where I couldn't understand what it meant for me, I instantly felt like it had to be my fault. And that shame came flooding back, and the blame was just so intense that it silenced me. I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't explain it. And I couldn't tell anyone because I just felt like if I did say those words, if I did tell people that I was grieving because of I couldn't conceive a child with my husband, they would say to me, well, you didn't deserve it because you've had a termination. So it was a very, very difficult time. I was lucky that I found Gateway Women very early on in my grief. And I do remember a friend telling me that I was grieving, and I felt like, what are you talking about? It didn't make any sense. And because of my terminations, I didn't deserve it. I didn't deserve to be a mum anyway. And I hadn't lost anything. So how could I be grieving? And I remember when I first walked into a workshop with Jodie Day, I was in this room of women and I felt like I didn't belong. And hearing their stories of multiple miscarriages, endless rounds of IVF, the women that didn't find the right man to have a family with, and the women who had early menopause, I just thought, you know what, I really don't belong here. If they knew what I'd been through, they wouldn't accept me, because I had given up the opportunity to be a mum when that was presented to me all those years ago. And I also felt like, they really wanted to be mums. These were women that would have done anything to be a mum. And I was quite ambivalent about the whole thing anyway. And it wasn't until I tried with my husband that I realized how much I really wanted a child with him. But even so, I just felt like a fraud. I felt like I just didn't belong, and it was such a difficult time. But, they did accept me and they did love me, and it allowed me to be in that room, and it allowed me to, in a way, own the grief and accept that I was allowed to grieve too. Through the stories I was hearing and as the months went on, I also realised that these women, none of us were being heard. Sometimes we would tell people, we didn't have children. But people tried to fix us, you know, don't give up hope, it's okay, you're still young, you've still got time, why don't you try IVF, all those things. And I'm sure a lot of you can add to these comments, but all of those things just said to me, I realized that we weren't being heard and we weren't being listened to. And I remember just jumping up and thinking, you know what, I'm going to write a book because I really want us to have a voice. I really want to be heard. And I'm going to, you know, tell our stories and get it out there. And as soon as I said it, I thought, what am I doing? I can't write a book. I'm not an author. I don't write. And how am I going to tell these stories? I just don't know. And who's going to listen anyway? So it was really, really weird. But all the women got behind me and they were cheering, yeah, we're going to do this together. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to let them all down. I don't know. Around the same time, I was going to a women's networking group locally where I live in Luton. And I remember that during the groups, we'd have like 2 minutes in small groups to introduce ourselves, talk about ourselves, and get to know each of the women around the table. And this one specific meeting, there was probably about 6 of us around the table. And I remember that I was the last one to introduce myself, and every woman had introduced themselves as a mother or as a grandmother. And I sat there and I thought, oh my God, I have nothing to talk about. I have nothing of value. And I've done a lot of stuff. I've traveled the world. I've done loads of crazy sports, bungee jumping, whitewater rafting. I had lived a really exciting life. But I sat there and thought, but I'm not a mum. So why would these women want to hear anything I had to say? And I felt so low and I had nothing to offer. It was really difficult. Again, it was like this childlessness, this grief was silencing me. It did come around to me, and I also later on in that afternoon, that evening, I had the opportunity to stand up and talk. And I stood up and I told those women what it felt to be amongst them. The grief was so difficult, and to hear that they were all women and I wasn't, they were all mothers and I wasn't a mother, was so difficult for me. And I stood there and I explained to them what it was like to be me amongst them. And I also told them I was going to write a book. Now, this was very unusual for me because I wouldn't tell people about my plans in case they failed, and then I wouldn't have to explain why it failed. But this time it felt like I needed to say this. And once I said it, the lady who ran the workshops, Helen Tucker, said to me that she wanted to meet and she wanted to hear more about my book. And being a mother herself, I thought, oh, really? And when I did explain everything to her, she said she wanted to help me get the book out because she felt it was a very important story to hear and it was very important to get it out. And I guess given that she was a woman who it helped other women, coached other women, mentored other women, she actually saw the value in what I wanted to do. And it was great because she helped to focus me and get me on track and put things in place so I could put the book together. But one of the things that really scared me was that there's a part of my story that I didn't quite accept for myself. Those terminations were just holding me back. That shame was holding me back. And I didn't know what to do with it. I could have left it out, but it felt like a lie. It felt like my story wouldn't be complete if I didn't tell that side of my story. And it also felt it was an important part of my story because that was the reason why I was really grieving. That was the trigger for my grief. And it wouldn't have felt whole if I had done that. And then there was a case of, well, you could write under a pseudonym. And again, it felt like a lie because actually I couldn't own it fully if I didn't put my name behind it and if I didn't tell the whole truth. But the big thing was I knew that if people heard that truth, they would be like, you see, she didn't deserve to be a mum. And that was so difficult. It was so difficult. Jodie really helped me to work through this. I remember on a conversation with her, she said, if your friend was going through this, what would you say to her? And the words that came out was of such love and compassion. I realized that I need to give that back to myself. I need to talk to my younger self like that. So I wrote a letter to my younger self and I told her that I understood why she had to make those decisions. You know, they weren't mistakes, they were decisions she had to make. Almost of survival, but to protect her unborn child, her unborn children, to protect her family, because she wanted the best for them. And I gave her love and forgiveness was what she needed. And when I was able to do that, I found that I could own that part of my story. And it really empowered me to start writing, start putting down on paper everything that I needed to say to be a part of that book. At this point, Nikki, is there anything that you wanted to comment on?
Hang on, sorry, sorry, Yvonne. I was busily typing over on Facebook about some of the things that you've been mentioning, and yes, there is. I'd like to say the fact that thank you so much for being so brutally honest about your situation, what you went through, and that terrible dilemma you must have gone through regarding your book and how much you actually shared. And whether or not you wrote it under your real name or a pseudonym and things, because I can imagine that was so difficult. And I can empathise with you about that feeling of the guilt and the shame over your terminations, because although that never quite happened to me, I thought I was pregnant with my first husband. We weren't ready for it at all, too young. He was trying to convince me to have a termination. I was battling against that because I didn't particularly want to, but I knew that I couldn't at the age of sort of 22 go it alone. And I have always looked back at that time and thought that, you know, thankfully the universe took control of that situation, and it turned out that I wasn't pregnant, so I didn't have to go through that. And I've often thought about, you know, if I had, how would that have changed my grief and how I was feeling now? So, as I say, I haven't experienced it myself. However, I can empathise with how difficult that must have been for you to go back and re-explore and give yourself permission to be okay with it, if you like, you know.
Yes.
And accept that we make the decisions that we make at the time based on the knowledge that we have at that time.
Yes.
And people talk about the benefit of hindsight. In my book, it's hindsight is not a benefit usually. You have to be so careful with hindsight.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I haven't thought about myself before, but it is a very interesting point. And I think it's a very poignant point also, because whatever it is, mine is termination. Somebody else could be something else. Some people miscarried, feeling guilty at that because they queried whether they wanted to keep the baby, and they might have battled with that situation. And there are other things. So there are so many things that impact on our guilt that actually these are normal everyday decisions that we have to make, and we do that for a reason, for protect us, because it might not be the right situation, as you've identified in your own situation. I've heard other stories as well, and I found through my honesty and my openness that the stories I've heard back, you know, that's just blown my mind in itself, because I realise it's given other women permission to talk about it too. And it's a little bit of ownership that they're getting back for themselves. And also it's enlightening me, because there's things that I hadn't appreciated or hadn't quite thought about, that I'm starting to realise how huge this all is and how important it is to be able to tell our stories and tell it in its entirety, because we really do need to have that forgiveness and that compassion back.
Yeah, most definitely. And I don't want to panic you. I don't want to overwhelm anybody who's listening to this. But you were saying about the fact that sometimes you hear other people's stories and you realise something that hadn't dawned on you at all. And that happened to me almost exactly 2 years ago to the day. I had a phone call from a girlfriend that I've known since we were both 5. And we had a lovely long conversation. And at the end of the conversation, she said, I do actually have something to tell you, Nikki. And I joked with her and I said, well, it can't be that you're pregnant, because I know that we've both reached 50 now, and that's unlikely. And I've actually predicted her pregnancy on 2 occasions over the phone. So she had a bit of a laugh about that, and she said, no, it's not me, it's your goddaughter, my eldest daughter. And my heart sank for a moment, and then I was really pleased, because this girlfriend of mine had been reading my blogs and knew that she had to phone me and tell me personally about this, and had told her daughter not to share anything on Facebook until Auntie Nikki had been told. So that was a huge, wonderful, thank you so much for that. And I was absolutely fine with all of this, particularly as this young woman has probably got endometriosis, which is what I have suffered from. That's why I can't have children. And she had managed to have a child before it really caused a problem.
Okay.
No problems with that at all. And then it dawned on me that this was my first, I'm going to be a granny announcement. And I thought I had got about 4 or 5 more years to before I had to deal with that.
Yeah.
And when that dawned on me, I suddenly thought, this is the oldest of my friends' girlfriends. The youngest one is only going to be about 11. So I've got potentially probably another 36 years of woo-hoo-hoo, I'm going to be a granny announcements. And the 8 years of being crucified by the I'm pregnant announcements was nearly the end of me. It was a huge wobble, because I hadn't even contemplated that would happen. So as I say, I don't want to to worry people. I don't want to overwhelm people with that. What I would say is that I had that huge wobble 2 years ago, and look at me now. I've survived it, and I'm absolutely fine. Because we can survive.
Yeah. I mean, that is another great story and another important thing to share as well, because we can't get away from the baby announcements or the grandmother, I'm going to be a grandmother announcements. And I'm getting both of those at the moment because of, I'm 47. So I have friends in their 40s who, and I have this had this in the last 2 years, who have got pregnant. Mm-hmm. I've had my younger brother, who's 10 years younger than me, has recently had a son. Mm-hmm. And I've got family members who are nieces and nephews now on my husband's side who are announcing their pregnancies, and also our cousins then announcing that they're being excited that they're becoming grandmothers. Mm-hmm. So it's like all of this at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, wow, come on. And it's incredibly hard. Mm-hmm. But when you've done that grief work and you've gone through it, actually it's a lot easier to deal with. It's still hard, but it's a lot easier to manage because we have the things in place now. We've got the coping mechanisms. And also I found, because I was able to do this, because I'm blogging, because I've written my book, because I can tell my story, I've been able to say to people, as much as I am happy for you, right now I can't share in that joy because it's too painful. And actually I've had the same experience. My brother, who was so wonderful with me, told me himself, we're expecting a child, and I wanted to tell you first because I needed you to know, because you're my sister and I know this is difficult for you. And that in itself was beautiful, because as sad as I was, it was nice that someone thought about it. And that doesn't always happen. Some people do disregard it. And I know a lot of women out there are going to find it difficult to share, because not only are people fixing us, they do disregard that feeling. And it's almost like, oh, aren't you over that as yet? But why can't you be happy for the other person? And they don't understand, actually, we can hold both those feelings. It's just too difficult to stay with the happiness because we are so sad, and we just need to honour that. Yeah. And sometimes honouring that does mean we can't be there. We have to move away just so we can deal with it.
And I think there's almost a problem with when we are children and we are learning about emotions and things like that. You have the flashcards of a smiley face put up in front of you, and you are asked, what emotion is this? And you say happy.
Yeah.
And you get another one of somebody crying and you ask what that is. And it's almost as if we are being conditioned to think that it's only possible to have one emotion at a time.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's not, you know, I can be happy and I can be upset. I can be thankful, but I can be frustrated and things. And I think that's a conversation we need to be having with people, so that you realise it is possible to be happy for the individual because they have got what they want, and perhaps they've been going through infertility issues themselves. So they've finally got that solution. Yet at the same time, we should be allowed to feel sad because we are not there. Because if we're not allowed to do that, or if we don't think we should be allowed to do it ourselves, then we fall into the trap of then feeling guilty.
Absolutely.
We feel shame.
And that shame silences us. Absolutely.
And we start beating ourselves up and saying, I must be a terrible friend if I can't be happy for my girlfriend.
Yeah.
And yet we've got a valid reason for it initially, and we need to sort of let it settle and get to the stage where we can say, okay, I've now dealt with this, and now I can be the supportive friend that I want to be, and that my friend needs me to be as well.
Yeah, that is a excellent point. It really is, because a lot of us do experience that, and as I said, that guilt and the shaming of it all really does silence us, and therefore we can't tell our stories because it's too much. And because we get that back, because you do get the comments, why can't you just be happy for me or for them, or aren't you over it as yet? And then the fixing comes in, you just feel like you can't do it. You really do, because you want to protect yourself from that experience.
Most definitely, and protection is a very big part of it as well. So I'm going to let you go back to what you generally speaking were going to be covering, and I will pop on when you need me again. Okay,
thank you.
Bye.
So one of the things that came out of me writing the book, or putting it all together, because I hadn't, in March 2015, it was due to be self-published in summer of 2016. So in March 2015, I had the opportunity, or March 2016, I had the opportunity to speak at International Women's Day locally at a local event. And I remember when I was asked, the first thing I said to the organizer is, if you really knew me, you wouldn't ask me to talk. And she was like, come on, what are you talking about? And I told her my story. And she said, and? And I really thought, even though I'd gone through this process of forgiving myself, I still had this doubt that my inner voice was still telling me the fact that you had terminations, people are not going to want to hear from you. They're not going to allow you to stand up there and talk and tell your story and be proud. So I was so scared. But the organizer said, no, this story needs to be told. So we went along, and I was there for the day. And I remember those minutes leading up to me getting on that stage, I was hyperventilating. Somebody should have been on standby to give me oxygen, because I did not know how I was going to get up on that stage and be naked in front of all of those women. There was about 100 people in that room. But I took those first steps on the stage, and I told my story in front of my friends, my family. My uncle had flown over from New York, didn't know what to expect. And yeah, I was there and I told them. And at the end of it, I had this standing ovation. And I was amazed at the sense of pride and love that came back to me whilst I was on that stage. And it was in that moment I knew I was in the right place. Now, I know not everyone's going to take centre stage in such a big public forum to tell their stories, but I just want you to hear how powerful it is, how empowering it is to be able to speak your truth, to tell your story. And once I was able to do that, I found that I actually could tell my story how I wanted to tell it, to who I wanted to tell it to, and in the way I wanted to tell it, because it wasn't about always telling people that I had a termination. In some respects, I only told them part of that story, but I could do that. It wasn't the shame holding me back anymore. It was me wanting to do it how I wanted to do it and being able to do that. So that was such a huge experience for me. My book came out in 2016, and I had a lot of journeys, a lot of experience then of telling my story, of owning it, of having newspaper interviews, radio interviews, and public speaking. And it was amazing. And something I said to Nikki earlier, that I found that when I was telling my stories, it was like women were being given permission to then open up and tell theirs too. And to watch these women own a part of their story was amazing. I remember doing a book launch, a book touring event with some people. And I was in London, and I told my story, introduced my book. And this woman who asked me a question turned around and, said, I'm a childless woman. And then instantly went, oh my God, I'm in my 50s and I've never said those words before. And to watch her own, I am a childless woman, she owned those words. It was just amazing. And, giving women their voices back has been such a joy to watch. Another part of my journey, and in fact, another part of my story took another turn when Jodie Day asked me a question about a month ago. And she noticed, knowing that there are a number of Black women and women of colour who are childless, she noticed that not many of us were connecting with her. And she asked me, Yvonne, why aren't Black women talking to me? And I thought, oh, this question makes no sense to me, because being Black has not affected my grief. And how does that make me any different from anybody else, any white person that's grieving? And when I thought about it, and when I talked to my Black friends, I realized that there were kind of two big areas of this that actually did make it different for us, because we have different experiences as Black women, but that also held us back and also silenced us. And it made me wonder how much this affected us and our ability to grieve and talk and own our stories as well. I remember thinking about the fact that as a race, the pride that my family had, my parents grew up in the Caribbean, they came to England during the Windrush period, and they were faced with a lot of racism, no Irish, no Blacks, no dogs, when they were walking around trying to find accommodation, trying to get jobs, trying to buy a home. And the struggles they went through to afford to have a family, to have a home, to give us an education, and to give us the best start in life, I realized how much pride they carried with them. And hearing the comments of, don't bring shame on the family, what will the neighbours think, don't tell your problems outside, don't speak outside of the family. Hearing these things as a child, which we still now carry as adults, I used to hate that, I used to resent it. I was like, why not? But then I realised when I thought back what they were doing, it was kind of in a way of protection, because I can imagine when you're looking at racism, how much people were looking down on my parents, on our families, and how much they thought, we've got to show that we're better than they think we are. So we needed to carry that pride. So if we hid our problems, if we locked it all away, if we didn't show that we had a weakness, we could show white people that we were okay, we were better, we were equal to them, we were just as good as them. And therefore, carrying that with us, it is a way of silencing, because we won't go and talk about stuff outside of our family unit, because what would they understand anyway? I remember my dad told me, you're going to have to work twice as hard because you're a woman, and you're going to have to work even harder because you're a Black woman. And at the time it meant, I thought, why are you telling me this? But now I realise how much what he was trying to give me in those words. I guest blog for Gateway Women last month, and my blog titled The Black Woman in the Room, I did speak about some of these experiences I had. And it really reminded me of those experiences of being the angry Black woman in the room, where I could see I was being treated differently from all the other white women in the room. And, usually I was the only Black people in the room due to my position at work and in other positions I've held. but I really noticed how different I was. And I noticed when I'm speaking up and trying to voice my opinion, how different I was treated. And it was strange because I couldn't understand why I felt that way. But I realized I was seen as the angry Black woman in the room. And I realized also that then we can't talk about race. We can't say, what is this about? We can't question it. We might do inside, but we can't really vocalize this, because then we're dealing with white fragility and white privilege, and therefore those feelings get dismissed, we get shamed, and again we're silenced. So it's really difficult for us to explore the truth around what's going on. And therefore, if we can't do that, how do we tell our stories? Because race, our experiences, is a very important part of that. Another part of this I found was religion. Now, there's an aspect of religion and the language we use, especially in charismatic churches, that I hadn't experienced around white people. For me, it was really just in my race, in my culture, that I had seen this. Now, I had got to a point in my mid to late 20s where I was really down on myself. I thought, oh, I'm the crappiest person in the world. I make really crappy decisions. And I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. I was disgusted with who I saw back. And I also couldn't walk. I walked on the street with my head down, and I didn't want to catch anyone's gaze. The shame that I carried with me was so great. And church offered me this place where my past is my past, it's all forgiven, my sins are washed away, and I'll be new again. And this was great because I really needed to not be who I used to be. I really needed to be different, be seen as different, to feel different. So I just jumped into that environment and I embraced it, and I ran along, and I was there for about 10 years. And for most of the time it was great because I did feel like I belonged. But I got to a point within that where I stopped feeling like I belonged. And when I asked questions, people again tried to silence me. It would be, well, you don't have enough faith, just take it to God, hear his voice, things like that. Or they'll give me a scripture to think about. And it was really difficult because I just thought, I don't get this. And I didn't find any honesty in that environment. So I didn't really know what to do with it. And I couldn't understand my feelings. I remember later on in my experience talking about this with someone, and they said the reason why people were telling that is because actually they didn't have an answer for you. They didn't know what to say. But at the time I found it very diminishing. It's like I didn't have any faith, and it felt like God didn't love me because I didn't hear his voice and he wasn't speaking to me. So again, I was silenced, and I felt like I didn't belong and I didn't feel good enough. So it was too great for me, and I just needed to leave. And when I did leave, there was a lot of criticism around that. And, I know it's kind of the things that I struggled with because it took me a long time to find a place where I belonged and find that I was happy with myself. So again, I was silenced, and for a long time I was silenced because I just couldn't hold on to that. I didn't know what to do with that pain. One of the things I did find from that is our pain is just as valid as it is for others. So why shouldn't our stories be heard? And if our stories are not heard, they are missing from society. I've come a long way to when I was in my mid-30s, my late 30s, I was able to look at myself in the mirror, and I was able to smile, and I was able to love myself again and be okay with my decisions. And I was able to, in a way, move on with that. And because of my journey through Gateway Women and my journey of forgiveness, I was able to stand up and say, you know what, this is who I am and this is my truth. And just to quote Jodie Day, change happens one story at a time, one woman at a time. And this starts a chain reaction that breaks the shame and taboos. And this allows us to break free and tell our stories. And I just wanted to make one last point on that. And that is, when we own our stories, we can share our stories, and sharing them can be such a liberating and healing experience. we do feel less alone, less silenced, and less shamed. Our stories just bring the richness back into our lives, and they allow us to reclaim our existence. And Nikki, I'm going to bring you back in there.
Hello. I was wondering whether or not to jump in earlier, and I thought, no, you're on a roll. That's absolutely brilliant. I mean, there is so much in there. And I think particularly when you were talking about the fact that you felt that you had found your home within the church, and then you started to realise that you were being silenced there as well. And I loved your point about the fact that if people were starting to give you scripture, or say you just trust in God more, or you obviously don't believe enough, or hand it over, give it back to Him, etc. I loved your point that you came to the conclusion that is actually because they don't know what to say, and I think that is so true, because we did a series for World Childless Week, a series of short videos about some of the insensitive comments that people can make. And one of the comments that we dealt with was, it's not in God's plan. And one of the things that we were talking about was, hang on a minute, here's me as a loving woman. I'm in this loving relationship. We've got all of this to offer a child, and it's not in God's plan. However, it's in God's plan for a drug addict to have a child, or whatever. How do you answer that? And I think sometimes what happens is that if you were to give that question, or ask that question of somebody who is a very strong believer, they just don't know how to answer it, because how can they answer it? And I think sometimes that's when they start saying, oh, well, you don't believe enough, or go back to scripture, or whatever it is, because they don't have the answer. Not that we're really asking for an answer, we're just asking them to sort of just,
Yeah. I think the whole thing, I mean, oh my God, you've just reminded me of so much when you said that, is that it's the acknowledgement. I think having open and honest discussions is about acknowledging and understanding different points of view, and accepting some things. I might not get what you just said, or will never have experienced it, but how would I learn from that if we don't have it? How would I learn from it if I just dismiss it? If I shame you into silence? This is where the richness comes from. And when you were saying that, I remembered, because there's so many abused children in the world. How is that God's plan? Because there wouldn't be children to be adopted if really and truly God's plan was working out in the way that people said it should work out. And me being in church, trying to live my life, and I really did do this. I was one of those people that did say, I would quote scripture, I would say things like, you don't have faith, just pray about it. I was that person. And I've lost my train of thought there. But I remember thinking that, and a friend said this to me as well, that if it was, yes, that's what it was. I was doing all the right things. So hang on, if I had A, B, C in place, why wasn't D happening? Because this is what people told me would happen. If I read the Bible, if I do this, this will happen. And that this did not happen. Yeah. And I did not, and I'm like, I don't get this, I'm lost. And I saw other people not doing all of that, and that this would happen. And, and being in the church, I know if people outside of the church were getting those blessings, they would say, oh, it's not of God, it's of the devil. It's not going to fulfill them and all those things. But I would see, if you really step back and look at it, you would see exactly the same things happening in and out of church. You would see the same blessings, the same happiness, whether people believed in God or not. And one of the things that really brought it home to me, because my friend did say to me that, maybe the reason why people say it's in God's hands, it's God's will, is because it comforts them, because actually the grief is too great for them to deal with. So it was a way of that comfort, so that they didn't have to do that. But again, it's another form of silencing. But my friend who did do that herself said to me, hang on, Yvonne, why would God allow me to get pregnant if it was his plan for me not to be a mum? Why did he allow me to get pregnant and be so happy about that? only to fall on the street and lose the baby.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, you know, that really brought it home. And then I equally asked, why would he allow me to get pregnant when that was the last thing I wanted?
Yes. Yeah.
I have to make that decision that I wish to God, because I pray to God I didn't have to make that decision, and I did, you know. And hearing the words, it's in God's will, don't give up hope, it is a way of keeping us in denial.
Yes.
But it also said to me that I wasn't good enough because God see me fit to be a mum, or I wasn't blessed enough to be a mum, or he didn't love me enough to be a mum. And that I just didn't want to believe. I couldn't do that because it just wasn't going to help.
And I can, when you were talking, I was thinking, you know, I can totally understand why, if somebody does believe in God and they're going through this situation, their faith either becomes much stronger or you have a crisis of faith. And I can equally believe that people who don't have any sort of strong faith have exactly the same thing. They either go, this is proof that there isn't a God, or they find God because that's how they are seeking some kind of answer, some kind of way of healing it all. So you know, I can fully understand why all of these conversations, or rather not conversations, but situations happen. And also I think it's important why we talk about them as well. You know, we tend to shy away from talking about these things. Perhaps that's just me, but I was always taught by my parents, you know, in polite society, as in outside the immediate family, you don't talk about money, sex, religion, or politics. End of. You know, so you had your, you know, you mustn't talk about this because you'll bring shame on your family. I had a lot of the, you know, you never talk about the other types of things as well. And you know, we have to sort of go back and think about why that is. Why are we being silenced by things which we were taught about in the past, in our childhood? And the other thing you were mentioning when you were talking about your situation as not only a woman in the room, but the black woman in the room as well. That is so difficult because culture, race, it's such a minefield of potential problems and potential offence. You know, I'm sitting here and I'm talking and my mind is racing about how to say this without being offensive to anybody. And it's, for my attitude is, it shouldn't be an issue at all. You know, we shouldn't have to be worried, but we're going to offend somebody. Because it really, the culture, the colour of somebody's person's skin does not matter at all. They are all humans. You know, it matters in the sense of we shouldn't be offending people and we shouldn't be racist, but you know, fundamentally it shouldn't matter. And one of my closest girlfriends, her father is white Caucasian, her mother is from, I can't remember which country it is, but anyway, her mother is part Zulu.
Okay. And
I can remember when my brother first met this girlfriend of mine just before Andrew and I got married. She was doing something. Actually, it might have been actually at the wedding. And I can remember my brother coming up to me afterwards and said, "You've known this friend of yours for sort of 15 years." And I had got no idea that she was of mixed race of some sort. And I said, "Well, why would you?" And she said, "Well, you've never mentioned it." I said, "Well, why would I? As far as I'm concerned, her culture is important in terms of culture, but other than that, it's totally irrelevant to me whether she's white, black, green, yellow, pink, whatever. It shouldn't matter, and it does. And it's so difficult when these things come up, these conversations come up, to know how to deal with them, because we do have to be careful because we don't want to offend. And yet it's such a shame that we have to be so careful as well. Yeah.
I think, yeah, I agree. I think it is such a shame that we have to be so careful because we don't move on from it. I think there's so much. I mean, what you've just said, my mind is racing because there's so much in that in itself that I'm like, oh, I want to pick up on that. I want to pick up on that. I want to pick up on that. And I'm like, where do I start?
And I'm also very, very conscious that what I might have been saying was playing into my white privileged background as well. Yeah.
Which it is. And I think the fact that we can acknowledge that is part of being able to have a conversation, because actually we can sit comfortably with the knowledge that actually we might have just said something that the other person might have gone but guess what, that's okay, because she can tell me that and I can receive it and understand and therefore be more conscious about it next time. You know, hearing the race didn't matter for me, it's like actually it does, because I think it's an important element of who I am. So I would want to know that somebody knew I was a black person. I understand what you mean when you say it didn't matter, because actually it wasn't the forefront of what your focus. But at the same time, I'm like, well, actually, surely the person being this black woman, this Zulu, this some, you know, I know people are like, with me, the way you carry your hair and this, you know, there's so many elements of me being black that they are just focusing on and going, that is what makes you beautiful. That is what you're about. And you know, and even for me, I want to wear my ethnic jewelry now, which I wouldn't do before, because you know, I'm in a white room and people, I can't hide that I'm black, of course. But there's an element of me having to fit in, so I have to speak a certain way, dress a certain way, carry, you know, wear my hair a certain way for the white person to accept me. And unless I do, then I am disregarded. So first thing I walk in the room, I'm black, then I speak, oh, she's okay. You know, so we're working so hard on all of this. And also sometimes I want to be able to say, is this because I'm black? Are you doing this to me because I'm black? And that in itself is hard, because automatically you get the defenses. Well, I'm not racist. I know white people. I'm black people. I've got a black friend. I talk to this. And it's like, why does that matter? You're treating me differently. And I've not seen you treat other white people like this. I've seen a situation where a white woman has screamed at, you know, been angry at a black man. And a white woman has been angry at a white man and has shouted at them. And they just took it on fine. And when I said, actually, I'm not happy with how you're treating me, there's been a complaint. What can I can't put that down to anything other than my race, because it, you know, but I can't talk about it because the white privilege and the white fragility does play into it. And all of a sudden I'm making an issue out of something that isn't there. And actually it is. And it is important that we be able to talk about it, because how do we get past it?
Exactly, because if we don't, then we can't get past it. You know, and you know, you mentioned about the fact that your parents came over with Windrush and things, and I know that there's a lot of conversations going on about that at the moment, and we have to be having those sorts of conversations. And you know, all cultures have to sort of go back into their history, and it's that fine balance between, we have to acknowledge what happened, the good and the bad, because if we don't talk about it, we are then hiding them. We're burying everything. So it has to be acknowledged. And we've got to be talking about these things to be able to move forward, because otherwise they're just swept under the carpet and nothing changes, and people will still be having this conversation in 4, 5, 6, 700 years time. You know, it shouldn't be.
Absolutely. And it's time we honoured it. I think we have to, it's because all the conversations, what happens is people are shamed from it. And I know there's a shaming element around it. When I talk about it, my intention might be to shame because of how I feel in that situation. But generally it's not about shaming you. It's about wanting you to understand how I feel. And similarly, the person in the other place may feel shamed because of what they're going through. But why can't we honour these feelings? Because if we can honour that, actually it adds to the richness of that conversation. It adds to us understanding us a bit better, and it actually takes our relationship to another level. And I think, you know, with the Windrush situation, I mean, I sit there thinking, I don't even get why this has happened, because it shouldn't have. It really shouldn't have happened. And I see my parents, my dad is very worried about it, and he is a British citizen. Who came in that period, who was encouraged to take a citizenship because don't trust the government because they will turn their backs. That's what he was relating to me. And he did that. And even now he's worried about it. And why should these people be worried when my dad came at 18, he's in his 70s now.
Exactly.
It's ridiculous. It really is.
Yeah. And you know, we've now gone sort of down very much the track of culture and racism, etc. But so bringing it back to the purpose of the focus of the We Are Worthy part of the summit is exactly the same sorts of things happen whether you are talking, you know, group of people are talking who have got different views on religion, culture, race, education, and being childless.
Yes.
Yeah. So what we've been talking about here is I can see so many similarities, and the way we need to move forward with the situations of somebody who is childless, not by choice, struggling to have a conversation with somebody who is a parent and who just does not understand how difficult it is for us emotionally, you know, in the rawest sense of the word, but also just our day-to-day existence. Yeah. You know, they look at adverts on the television and they just see them as adverts. We look at adverts on the television and it's a case of almost everything is about, you know, your 2.4 children. And why can't an advert about kitchen towel involve somebody wiping up after a puppy has weed? Why does it have to be about a child? You know, it's the number of times I scream at the television about that, because it's, to be honest, it's laziness on the part of view of the advertisers. You know, they're not out to make a point or anything. It's just plain laziness.
It's like, I can't really add more to that because it's absolutely true. And you really notice how much of it is around families and children, because we're in a situation where we've grieved, and it is, you know, we're really sad we didn't have children. And then we notice how much of this is important, because you can't be anything without a child. It's like, well, you know, another black woman said to me, actually, she being pregnant, who did miscarry, so and is subsequently childless now. But when she was pregnant, an uncle said, "Oh, you're a woman now." It's like, what? She's in her 30s. What do you mean? It took her pregnancy to be a woman?
Yeah. It is so frustrating, and one of the ones which I've noticed quite a lot of, and I think you notice the ones which really get you. They really get under your skin, and that's the ones you will continue to notice. I'm seeing so many things now about the fact that people who are childless, whether it's by choice or otherwise, don't have an invested interest in the future of our planet. We care less about our planet. And Andrew and I went shopping on Monday morning. We did the biggest shop possible, so we had sort of enough food for the whole week, and we didn't have to go out again. Actually, no, that was on Friday. So it was on Friday, and we got out the car. And as I got out the car, I sort of there was uneven surface, and I fortunately looked down, and there was too much information. I'm afraid there was a nappy. Just sort of in the gutter of this car park, on the side of the car park. And luckily I'd avoided it. I went and found Andrew, and I said, "Andrew, how far away is that rubbish bin?" And he said, 30-second walk. I said, "Come round here." And I pointed it out to him. And I said, that is a parent who is allegedly far more concerned about the future of our planet because they have had a child, and that parent can't be bothered to go and walk 30 seconds over there to a rubbish bin, throw that away, and then come back to the car. Doesn't take long. And if I'm about to get on my hobby horse, aren't I? If people as parents are so concerned about about the effect of things on the environment and protecting the world for their children, why are people still using disposable or undisposable nappies?
Yeah.
Why haven't they gone back to terry toweling nappies which they wash?
Yeah.
Because it's surely far better on the environment. But no, it's because they're busy. I can totally understand why people use them, because of the convenience, etc. But then don't tell us that we have a less vested interest in the future of our planet when all of these hundreds of thousands of nappies are put into landfills.
It's it's so interesting, and I think it leads on to the importance of motherhood, because there's also the stereotypes behind not being a mom as well. And there are a lot of women out there who wish they didn't be a mums, and again, this isn't about criticism, it's about honouring what is going on.
Yeah.
And it leads me to wonder why people wanted to become a mum. I even questioned that for myself. And when you see the importance people place on it, you have more of an interest in the planet, you're gonna contribute more to this world, and you have a better place in society, you're seen as a woman now, or all of these things. And when you look at how childless women, whether by choice or by circumstance, are seen, whether career women, the crazy cat lady, there's so much negativity around it. Why would we want to be here? Yeah. There's no value. It's funny when I look at women, I never used to be called a career woman. It's recently I'm starting to be called that. Have you got children? No. Oh, is it because you're a career woman? I'm like, well, I'm thinking, but I've got people on equal banding as me in work, and they are mothers. Why aren't they career women too? I don't get this. It's so interesting, all the stereotypes, all the meaning that's around it, that for mothers and for non-mothers, it's really difficult. And when we get the negativity, because that's what we get, we're the women who are selfish, we have loads of money, we've got all the time on our world, we clearly don't care, and no one worries about us. I remember one of the gateway women that I know was talking about, maybe it was a year ago, 2 years ago, when there was a lot of bombings around, and they used to have those announcements on public transport about being vigilant. And you had the child's voice, help me get my mummy and daddy safely home. Who's getting us safely home? Who cares about us? And when you're in this situation, when everything is around that motherhood, how do we stand up and say we should be counted to, that we matter to? Because who wants to hear it?
And that brings me nicely onto how I was what I was going to say next, which was, we're talking about owning our own story, and as you own your own story, as you start to do that, you start to build up the desire and the confidence to start sharing that story, not only with your closest family and friends, but you then start sort of going out to the next level, the next layer, and you step further and further away from yourself. And that can be very daunting. And people who are listening to this might think, well, I'm getting to the stage where I want to do that. However, Yvonne, you're looking sort of, very, very calm and collected about this. So is Nikki. If I talk about this, I'm going to start crying. What advice would you give to somebody in that sort of situation who's feeling that they want to speak, but they're worried that their emotions will get the better of them?
So I have been in situations where my emotions have got the better of me. The more you can own it for yourself, the more prepared you are for it. I think you're always testing the waters, and it's something somebody did ask me about recently, because they were worried that they couldn't do it anyway. And because of what was going to come back at them, the negativity they'll get back. And the truth is, in reality, we don't know what will happen. Our inner voices want to give us all the negative and tell us we can't do it. But I found that if I can prepare myself, the more prepared I am, the better I am. So, you know, I practice on my family. I practice on who are closer around me so that I could anticipate, you know, once I kind of knew what they were going to say because they were saying it, I would know what my feelings are. And then when I knew what my feelings are, I would be able to manage. So I might need to say, do you know what? I'm really upset by what you just said. And I actually, there's times when I've had to do it because I've been in the room and been very angry at something being said around childlessness, childless women. And I said, I'm finding it really tough to listen to what you're saying, to hear what you're saying right now. I do want to cry. Sometimes we do need to be honest about it. I know it's difficult. You might be in a meeting and there's a whole load of men and you're this woman, especially if you're the only one, it's going to be like, So maybe you might not use the words, I want to cry, but I would use the words, actually, I'm not happy with what you just said. You know, that it does anger me to hear this, and I'll tell you why. Do you know what? I'm just going to need to leave the room at the moment because I just need to think about what you just said. You know, there are many options, and I think you've got to assess the room for one, because I'm not in that room. It's really hard to say. And there's some rooms that are going to be more uncomfortable than others. But I think, as I said, once you can own it, you're more empowered to be able to deal with it. And when you're in there, just kind of assess who's there, and you might want to think about it beforehand. Actually, I'm going in a room with a whole load of men. I know what they're like, because usually it's not the first time we're in that room. And just think about some things you might want to say if it happens, if it arises. What do you need to do for yourself? One of the things that we learned as well with Jodie Day on my Plan B mentorship program was comforting ourselves. So just rubbing the back of our hands, because sometimes we start to feel those triggers of getting angry. So I might just sit there, my hands under the desk, but I'm just rubbing myself just to calm myself down. I might just sit there and do this just to calm myself down, just to give myself comfort. So actually, I will be okay. Again, I might not talk about it, but I will be okay because I'm doing that. So whatever you can do to comfort yourself, find those little tools. These are all helpful.
Absolutely brilliant. And I want to just pick up on a couple of the things that you were saying there about, particularly about preparation beforehand, and perhaps changing the words that you use. You know, if you are starting to feel uncomfortable and you say that, I feel as if I'm going to cry, you're almost giving yourself permission to cry. And I know that that's not the wrong thing, but that's not wrong. However, in some circumstances, you don't want to. So don't use those words, I'm going to cry, because that then becomes almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, that's
and I do like your idea of taking ownership and being strong about it and saying, hang on a minute, I'm not happy with what you've said. I just need to leave the room for a moment and go and think about this. And I think that's a great way of doing it. So I'm a great believer in planning things, planning ideal responses. The other thing I would say is that, depending on your situation, obviously you're not going to want to do this in in a work and meeting sort of situation. But if you're actually if you've been asked to go and talk to a group of people about your situation, so you are sharing your story properly, and you start to get the emotions bubbling up, there are a number of things you can do. One is to again change the narrative in your head to and take a step back, and perhaps again use your language in a way which brings the bubbling emotions down, takes it down a level or two. And I had a situation where I was doing a video challenge about this time last year, and one of the things that we had to do was sort of share a bit of personal stuff about us, or actually it was why you do what you do. And I'd already started the blog. I didn't know about the magazine or the summit yet, but I was starting blogging again, and I started to explain why I did the blog, and halfway through I just burst into floods of tears. And I thought, okay, what I need to do is I need to take a step back from this. I need to sort of let the emotions calm down, and I need to think about what it was that triggered me, because I was doing okay initially. And I thought that might take me sort of a day before I could go back and record this thing. And it was like 2 minutes long. this video was. I went and had a bath. I thought about it for a moment. I thought, okay, I think what I need to do is desensitize myself a bit. So I will just go over it time and time again, desensitize myself a bit, and then I will record one which I will publish. The very next time I did it, so this is like half an hour after I've been in floods of tears, you can still see the smudges of mascara. I went through it, but because I reordered how I was going to say things, the trigger was right at the end. So I went through all of the important bits first, and I got to the trigger, and I got to the end and pressed stop before the floodgates opened. So that's another trick, is to, if you are practicing something that you are going to be, you know, a speech that you're giving, a talk you're giving, and you're finding that something is causing you to get very emotional in the middle and you don't want to, see if you can reorder it slightly so that that comes at the end, so it doesn't have enough, as much of an impact, if you like. And then the final things to say is, actually, it doesn't really matter. If you get to the stage where I have, where you're actually quite comfortable showing your vulnerability and showing a bit of that emotion, then it actually makes for a much more powerful talk, video, or whatever it is. And if anybody's not watched my welcome to the summit video I've got on the homepage, I had got no idea that I was going to burst into tears in that, because I felt absolutely brilliant before I started, and just something I said went click and I started to cry. And then I have learned how to move forward from that.
Yeah.
I decided to take that, retake that, and I thought, no, actually, this really illustrates how important self-worth is for us. Okay? And I'm not saying that everybody has to do this. Yeah. I'm just saying that if you get to the stage of wanting to share your story with more people, don't be afraid to let that vulnerability, let the emotions come through. Because otherwise, if you're talking to people who don't understand, they're just going to say, well, you're saying that it hurts, but yeah, look at you, you're absolutely fine. Yeah.
Nikki, that you've just reminded me, when a few years ago I sang at a friend's birthday party, and a lady came up to me afterwards and said, your strength is in your vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, okay. And when I went through my grief and was then able to talk about it and stand up and do what I'm doing, I realized what she meant, because those moments that you've just talked about, when I would cry while I'm talking about it, I could feel it, and it was so strong that, oh, what am I going to do with this? Mm. And there's times when I might just say it, because I think it's about honoring it as well. I might just say, oh my God, those emotions, that's strange. Yeah. It's just there. Or, you know, there are other ways other than crying, because to manage it, but sometimes I agree with you, let it out, because I think, especially for a woman who's right at the beginning of it, I think it's important for her and other people who may not even understand why we're in this place to know that actually grief is not a linear process. Yeah. We're not going to be here at the beginning feeling this way and then at the end going, right, I'm fine now. We will still have those moments when those griefy bits touch us, but we're able to say, but we can manage it differently now, that it's okay to still be sad. It doesn't feel as deep anymore. And I think when we're able to do that and honor it, it helps other women too to know that actually I am going to be okay. Yeah. I remember telling a woman recently who actually wanted to hear the grief ends. And I said, it doesn't end. I know it'll always be with me. But guess what? I just manage it differently now.
Yeah, most definitely. And the way I explain it is the fact that I think I will always have a child-shaped hole in my heart. However, the edges of that hole are not as raw and painful as they used to be. They've softened.
That is beautiful, yeah.
As we start to manage it, yeah, definitely. Yeah. I'm conscious of the time. So is there anything else that you would like to mention at all, just before we wrap up?
No, I think we've said so much and we've said it all. And, you know, the important thing I just want people to just remember is owning our stories liberates, empowers and enriches.
It's been lovely. And I'm sure that loads of people will find a lot of benefit from this. Just before we finish, where can people find out about you and your book? How can people get in contact with you?
So I'm on Facebook under Dreaming of a Life Unlived. I blog at Finding My Plan B, and you can buy my book on Amazon.